Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, a place where you can come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker, and welcome to episode 121, The Changing Me, Getting Honest About Where You Struggle. If you listened in last week, you know that this month we are looking at where we see ourselves today, how to get real with what needs to go, and what needs to be taken on in order to create sustained change. Because I want you to continue to be the person you were truly meant to be. I want you to feel more authentic, empowered, and alive. It usually involves some healthy work. So this week, it's all about getting very honest and very clear about what needs to change and why. And most importantly, how ready are you to get started doing that? Or maybe getting back on the path you wandered off of a few months ago, or maybe even a year ago. It's all good. You're back on the path now. That's all that matters. Now, you may already have your things you know you need to work on because you've already spent some time sitting in that. And maybe you already have a coach or a counselor to help you identify things. Hopefully, if you've done that, you've started in the work and are starting to feel better already. But even if you do, here's a range of areas I think you can still assess and see where you are. So today is all about getting real and getting honest with ourselves. And as you listen today, my hope is that whatever resonates is supposed to, and just go with that. So the big picture here that I'm talking about, and what we often talk about on the program, is self-confidence, empowerment, and taking ownership of your life. So when we look at areas of where we can struggle, the big area is lower self-confidence than we'd like to have, not being as happy as we'd like to be, and having some struggles that are evident. One of the areas that I think is really important is lack of assertiveness. But how do you know you struggle with this? Well, maybe you've caved more than once when you wish you had said no or stood up for yourself. Maybe you wish you had asked for help and now you're overwhelmed. Maybe you couldn't ask for what you needed in the moment. Maybe you never could state that you really wanted to eat somewhere else, that you really didn't want to watch this movie, or you didn't have time to go out tonight. Maybe you experienced too much self-doubt and lack of self-trust. You no longer feel solid that your thoughts and feelings make sense. Your feelings are yours and no one else's, and your thoughts make sense to you. They don't have to make sense to everybody else, but they'll probably make sense to a handful of people at least. Another way you know you lack assertiveness is you often feel confused, irritated, or overwhelmed, disempowered, not feeling like you have a whole lot of personal power in your relationships. Caveat here, you may feel okay in relationships where people are more loving and kind and safe for you. Yet when you are around the bullies in your life, the people who manipulate, have poor boundaries, maybe push your buttons, maybe that's where you cave, or you don't want to rock the boat, or you people please because you're afraid. So assertiveness, looking in that area. Another area connected to that is poor boundaries. And we talk about boundaries all the time here on the show because they're so important and foundational. There's external boundaries and internal boundaries. So looking at your external boundaries, the most obvious one is you have a hard time saying no. You have a hard time letting go of what other people think, what they do, what they choose. You feel responsible for their feelings, for their choices and their happiness with you, Now, people would not admit this on the surface, but you have to sit with that for a minute and ask yourself, did I not say no because I didn't want him to be pissed off or her to be upset? Or she's already got too much stress on her. So therefore, I didn't want to tell her the truth. Rescuing others from what they don't want to grow up and take care of. And that sounds harsh, but that's the truth. And remember, we don't rescue them. We're really rescuing ourselves from the idea of confronting reality about that other person. And we're avoiding conflict, perhaps. But here's the thing. You know you struggle with poor boundaries in your relationships because you have lots and lots of drama in those relationships. Because there are no lines separating where you end and others begin. And therefore, people are not taking responsibility for their own choices. So unhealthy behaviors continue. They may wax and wane, but they're never taken care of. And this feeds unhealthy conflict that becomes chronic and often abusive over time as people become more and more frustrated. Nothing's getting resolved is the key. You can't resolve anything without boundaries in a relationship. No boundaries, no trust is what I say. If you know KNOW boundaries, then you will know trust in your relationships. So those are external boundaries. That's a whole big area we don't have time to dive into today. But if you're not really sure that you're great at boundaries, then that is a good sign that you might want to work on them. If they don't come second nature, then there's work to be done. The other aspect of boundaries are internal boundaries or self-discipline. So there's a lack of self-discipline in your life if this is where you struggle. You have a hard time facing the realities of your life. Maybe you do a lot of wishful thinking. Maybe you overpromise, underdeliver, do some people pleasing, not recognizing, do I really even have time to do that for her kind of thing? So there's this lack of reality testing here. Like, I could do that, but at what cost? What is it going to cost me to run around every day and do things for everyone else? What is it going to cost me to work every night after I come home from work or finish work at home during the day? When do I sleep? When do I have downtime? When do I have time for my relationships? When do I have time to get my other stuff done? So when we work on internal boundaries, we really face some truths about life, about our lives. And what is key is working towards acceptance of responsibility for all of the variables, the benefits and the costs, the unintended net effects on other people. Going in and pretending things happen in a vacuum is rather immature. That's very childlike. Part of maturation is realizing, no, there's going to be consequences to that behavior. There might be long-term ramifications that I want to think about. Whereas a kid just wants to do something right now, or a teenager can't think past Friday night. So boundaries, that's a big area and a great place to work. Another area you can struggle in is settling. Settling for less than what you need and deserve. Maybe on the job. Maybe not asking to be paid what you're really worth. Or maybe just having your ideas respected and not stolen. Maybe your boundaries honored. How about how you're treated at work? Are you settling also for an environment that just has great people, but you're bored and you're not challenged and perhaps you're not growing? But maybe you're afraid to step out or you're afraid to leave them and let them down? What about settling in your relationships? Okay, so this is a huge area we could talk about all day, and we won't. But how healthy are your relationships? Are there boundaries like we just talked about? Is there mutual respect? How do you know that? Where's your proof? Or is there toxicity, bouts of emotional immaturity when people don't get what they want? Is there lack of trust and lots of drama? Or maybe you play it really safe in your relationships and keep those connections at arm's length, so you can't have any drama. But they don't really know what's going on with you in a vulnerable, own and express your deepest way, now do they? Because you don't want to be hurt or disappointed like in the past. Or maybe you don't even know how to let someone in that deep because growing up it was never safe, nor was it modeled for you or encouraged in you. So settling for less than what you need and deserve in your life. Another big area is perfectionism. Do you struggle with procrastination? Or its other bedfellow, paralysis? You know, paralysis when you have a lot to get done and can't even get started. Or maybe you go in blazing with energy, yet don't finish it. You know, having it perfect or horrible as your only two options makes it really tough to do things in reality, because shit will happen, and none of us is perfect. So you sit, you let things pile up, they sit unfinished, and you continue to sabotage yourself and your opportunities all in the name of fear. Boy, I wish we could take a hard look at how we worship fear. Yes, I said worship fear, which can steal so much from us in terms of not just opportunities, but I think feeling peaceful and content, feeling joy, deep connection with others, deep connection with life, feeling alive. Maybe your perfectionism keeps you focusing outside of yourself, which is often true, focusing on what everyone else needs today. Are you exhausted by all the running around, keeping 15 plates up in the air? Are you focusing on what's going on with everyone else to the extent that you aren't getting your own things done for you? Are you missing deadlines? Are you putting off your own sleep, your health, your relationships, your downtime? Maybe even your own ambitions and dreams. We run because we're avoiding. We're focusing out there on them because we're running from ourselves. Because we're so afraid we can't do it perfectly. Because we're so afraid if we focus on ourselves, then we might see imperfection and we can't handle that. So perfectionism is a big thing to look at and changeable. Another area is the victim mindset. Now, I'm not talking about having bad days and bad moments because those show up, even a bad week sometimes. I'm talking about chronic. Like, do you feel often like life acts upon you all the time? That it keeps coming at you in awful ways and it's about everyone else, like what they've done, what they've not done, what they won't do, what they're doing right now. As if these things, again, happen in a vacuum. And there's always drama. And you're so caught up focusing on people or circumstances, things in your life outside of you that are messed up. It's never about your choices, your behavior, or your attitude because the mantra is, because of them, I. Because of them, I can't do this. I can't have that. I'll never be able to, kind of thing. When we have a victim mindset, I personally think there's two big components. One is we haven't done the grief work yet. How about grieving how you really were actually wounded or traumatized in the past? You know, folks who dealt with chronic chaos, with awful events mixed in, can often normalize crazy. So maybe you normalized it. Maybe you thought it was okay. And therefore, you minimize that it was actually trauma you were dealing with back then. But you still have the wounds and you still have the real victim hurt there of truly being victimized. But as grown-ups, we have choices. And we're responsible if we want to be happy. As grown-ups, we have choices and we can choose to heal. We can do the grief work and we can change. And that's the other component, taking responsibility. So healing what happened, yes. And then, okay, now what? I can't go back and change what happened, but I can choose to be miserable the rest of my life, or I can take my power back and try to have the best life that I can. Maybe even because of what happened. If nothing else, at least in spite of. So victim mindset. Maybe you struggle with avoidance. Trying to prevent that outcome at all costs by not telling the truth, by not risking conflict, by setting a healthy boundary for yourself. You can avoid by not owning your behaviors that are causing problems in your relationships. Some of them we just talked about, like procrastination and perfectionism. But what about passive-aggressive behavior and manipulation and acting out? Not dealing with your emotions so you spew them on other people, or you're so highly reactive it's difficult to be around you. When we avoid, we ultimately are avoiding the self. And the way to work on healing avoidance is first sitting with us. What's really going on with us? What are we feeling? What do we think? What do we need? What are our boundaries? And that fear we've been worshiping, we have to unpack that and decide that something else is more important than fear. If you struggle with avoidance, you may also struggle with poor self-care. I think it goes with avoidance because it also speaks of a lack of self-love, along with struggles with boundaries. Like if we don't make time for ourselves, we can't take care of ourselves. Our bills are late, the house is disorganized, we haven't kept up with friendships, and when's the last time we had some downtime? What about taking time to even work with a coach to get your shit straight? Self-care, I think, is a lot of different things. And you've heard me say that before, that if we don't take care of ourselves, we will actually hurt the people that we love the most. It's really difficult to live with someone or work with someone or be related to someone or be the child of someone who's not taking care of themselves. You've heard me say before, that's the ultimate in selfishness. What happens when you eventually do have big health issues and they have to stop their lives and take care of you? We're not doing anyone any favors by ignoring our needs and not taking responsibility for taking care of ourselves. It's our job. They can't do it for us. And speaking of that, a big area that I think we can always look at is choice making. Not owning your choices, not taking responsibility for your life, all of it from A to Z. Owning what you've chosen and what your choices are right now in your life, instead of blaming others or circumstances, even in oh so subtle ways that we can often be guilty of. The because of them I mantra I mentioned earlier. Because you're realizing the benefits and the consequences of each action. And you're not playing naive to reality. First, though, we need to own what we think, what we feel, and what we need, and separate that from others, what they think and feel and need. We need to realize our irresponsibility is often a result of a lack of self-discipline and emotional maturity. That's harsh. That's hard to swallow, but very important to look at. I can tell you from working with folks over the years, especially working with relationships, the unwillingness for someone to want to grow up and heal on the inside will eventually destroy the relationship. The other person just can't stay. When we don't take responsibility for our life, we often have struggles such as depression, trauma, and anxiety, and we're not doing what we need to do to heal those or at least manage them so we can function better. So it's not the hand you were dealt, it's what are you doing with it? Yes, if it's awful, we have to grieve it. Of course. I'm not of the camp, suck it up, keep it moving. That never works. That got you surviving back in the day and it got you here. That's great. But that's not going to give you a full, joyful adult life. I believe in healing what happened and choosing how you want to live differently. Another area is shame-based upbringing. We've talked about that here on the show several times. Being shamed as a child can destroy your self-esteem, no matter what you say. Maybe there was trauma back there that was unresolved. I think shaming a kid is emotional trauma. It makes it hard for people to be emotionally mature. It makes it hard for them to take responsibility because there's so much shame and lack of self-love. Talked about the shame sponge before. It's so full, you can't even take any incoming criticism. Your fear is if you look at your shit and look at what isn't really healthy in your life, you're going to crumble or disintegrate or implode. That's why it's so important to get some self-love and some self-acceptance and some context around you. You know I'm going to talk about that. Like, there's a reason why you struggle, and a lot of that's not your fault. If your worth is conditional upon being perfect or securing an outcome, or whether you were a good child or kept your room clean or got A's or didn't get in trouble like your brother did, that's conditional self-worth, folks. That's scary. Which goes hand in hand with controlling behaviors and accompanying anxiety. Anxiety is another huge topic like boundaries, but to narrow it down a little bit for our purpose today, focusing on what everyone else needs and ignoring your own anger. You haven't done the grief work yet. That's why you're still controlling. You can't surrender to what is. To feel that raw fear and feelings about what might happen if you let go of control. Letting go is scary. But healing is amazing because we have to heal how events and unmet needs shaped our identity before we can take responsibility for making it better. So control issues is a wonderful area to work on with a counselor or a coach and start making some great changes. They're so worth it. But wait, if this were so easy, you would have done it already, right? So let's normalize why maybe we haven't done it yet. Let's look at some typical fears. Well, the big obvious one is of the unknown. It's like you might be miserable right now, but at least you know that. At least you have that illusion of control, because control is an illusion. We really don't have it. Only over ourselves. We have no control over anything outside of us. The hardest thing to let go of control of is the process of how things are going to play out, because we want to do it perfectly. We want to be in charge. You know why? Because if you're not in charge, you're vulnerable. Then you have to trust. You have to trust the process. You have to trust the big picture. You have to trust maybe the people that have stepped up to help you. And maybe in the past, people really hurt you when you're vulnerable. Maybe you fear feeling inept, already feeling so behind everyone else. Then here comes that shame, the not good enough around that. And here comes handling the guilt as well. When you face the shame you may have grown up with. Like, why didn't you work on this 10 years ago? That's going to come up too. Admitting can be hard, and that's one of our biggest fears, especially when we sit with the real impacts on our lives. And guys, that comes organically for everyone who does the work. When you get a little bit on the other side and you're doing better, here comes the regret. You're like, why didn't I do this a long time ago? Because you weren't ready. Our fear also could be how we have to face ourselves and maybe how we've hurt others and hurt ourselves. So we don't want to look at that. Those are some typical fears. It's letting go. So I tell clients, whatever's on your radar, start there and just show up. Just be open. Be honest. You might not be ready to pull a trigger on anything yet. That's okay. But if you keep showing up and you keep talking about it and you keep, like, say, for example, reading about boundaries, noticing them in your relationships, noticing how you struggle with them, oh, you're going to start working on it. Your subconscious is not going to just let go of that idea. Not when you gave it some really good, juicy information. It's going to help you change. It's going to help you have the courage to do something different. So, of course, there are many, many things we need to work on in life to become healthier and happier people. I think the list is pretty endless. But I also think that when we're overwhelmed and frustrated, it can be so helpful to have some guideposts as to where to begin looking and changing. We got to start somewhere. And what's neat is that you'll find over time, it's like this is all similar to a very large net. So when you touch on one thing, it's interconnected with the others. For example, when you work on boundaries, you have to work on grief and detachment, either right after or before or at the same time, or you will use boundaries to control rather than let go of others and simply define you. If you don't separate from others, how can you define what is yours to feel? What is yours to fear? So when you pull on that net, know that everything else that is meant to show up at that next moment to work on will happen. So just start where you are. Continue where you are if you've already started. And be kind and compassionate with yourself, as well as honest. Nothing changes until we get honest. But we're not going to change if we have so much shame and self-loathing that we can't even put one foot in front of the other. You need a good blend of both, a good blend of grace and truth. Whatever resonated with you today, just trust it. I believe it means that you are meant to be sitting here right now listening to this, and that it's time, or it will soon be time to work on it or continue working on it. I think each area has its own learning curves or gentle lessons that I think can change us and our life. So today we got down into identifying some important areas to look at so we can see if we need to work on some things to become healthier. These areas, I believe, hold the components of a confident, healthy self. They're also crucial if we want to have healthy relationships. We talked about how knowing when you start in one area, you'll eventually get to all the others because growth begets growth. And they're all interconnected. When we get healthier in one area, it also makes us want to look at the other areas. It's a great thing and can help guide you along the process. All you have to do, again, is show up with an earnest heart and willingness to do the work. Believe me, once you start doing the work, you're going to see that no, it's not rocket science and it's doable. Thank you so much for joining me today. May you stay healthy, grounded, and in your truth. Focus on some things you want to work on this week and have compassion for others who are struggling as well. Be sure to check the show notes at ownitpowercast.com and sign up for the newsletter that comes out each Tuesday. There you can get the bonus downloads. So, pay it forward, keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you could begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.